I'm done living under your shadow, Anthony. When Project Liberation is complete, you won't recognize your own life. Those were the exact words Margaret whispered to me the night she believed she'd finally broken free, right before she sent a secret text to the man she thought I didn't know existed. She had no idea that her little liberation plan was already a losing battle, because I had quietly mapped out every exit, every secret, and every betrayal long before she made her first move. What unfolded next will completely rewrite the way you think about trust, betrayal, and strategic revenge inside a marriage. Viewers, have you ever felt someone preparing to replace you, while still sharing your home, your meals, your bed? Tell me, how would you react? Please subscribe, like, comment, and watch till the ending to share this interesting story to your family and friend. Yes, my name is Anthony Thomson, and before everything collapsed, I lived what most people would call a balanced, predictable life in Chicago, the city of cold winds, steel bridges, and people who walk with purpose. At 39, I had built a career as a cybersecurity analyst, a job that trained me to see threats before they formed, to anticipate vulnerabilities long before anyone else even sensed a shift. It made me cautious, methodical, always 2 steps ahead. But in the one place where vigilance should have been natural, my marriage, I let myself believe in comfort. Maybe even naivety. My wife, Margaret, was 36, stunning in a subtle way, the kind of woman whose presence filled a room without theatrics. For 8 years we'd been partners, at least that's what I thought. I introduce myself now not as the man I was then, but as someone who spent years analyzing firewalls and network weaknesses, only to realize that the most dangerous breach is the one happening quietly in your own home. I didn't see it coming. Not at first. I was too busy trusting, too busy loving, too busy believing the person beside me wanted to build a forever with me. But looking back, I can now see the signs that were already forming, the subtle shifts in her tone, the brief moments when her eyes drifted somewhere far away, the lingering silence between words once full of warmth. I didn't know it then, but the storm had already begun gathering behind her smile. I think the first crack appeared on a night so ordinary it shouldn't have mattered. It was almost midnight, the kind of Chicago night where the cold presses against the windows like it's trying to come inside. I just finished running diagnostics on a client's compromised server when I walked past the hallway table and saw Margaret's phone light up with a soft glow. Normally I wouldn't look twice. We respected each other's privacy. But the notification preview stayed on long enough for my eyes to register the words before I could convince myself not to read them. You're almost ready for phase 1. And the sender was simply listed as mentor. It hit me oddly, like a soft punch to the stomach. Mentor? Not a friend. Not a coworker. And definitely not someone I recognized. Still, I convinced myself it was harmless. Maybe a professional development group. Maybe a nickname for a senior colleague. But the problem was, Margaret hated mentors. She once told me during one of our deeper conversations early in our marriage that she had been manipulated badly in her 20s by a self-proclaimed life coach who treated her insecurities like assets to exploit. She had vowed never to fall for anything like that again. So why was a mentor texting her now? The next morning I asked her casually about it. She stiffened for half a second, barely noticeable, before forcing a smile and saying, "Oh, just personal growth stuff." But her voice trembled. And in that tremble, something inside me whispered, "Pay attention. Please don't forget to subscribe." After that night, I began noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. Tiny shifts in Margaret's behavior that would have slipped past anyone who wasn't trained to detect anomalies. It started with her mornings. She used to hum while getting ready, usually some old R&B track her mother loved, but now she moved through the house with a quiet, clipped efficiency, almost like she was conserving emotional energy. Then came the new wardrobe, sleek, calculated choices, clothes she never used to wear. Not sexy, not revealing, just assertive. Power pieces. Outfits meant for someone stepping into a different version of themselves. Her late nights became more frequent. Strategy reviews, she'd say. But when I offered to drive her or pick her up, something she used to appreciate, she declined with a polite firmness that didn't fit her. She also began putting her phone face down, locking it instantly, a habit she never had across 8 years together. She used to hand me her phone without a thought when she needed me to check her calendar or reply to a message while she cooked. Now the device felt like a guarded door. But the thing that disturbed me most wasn't her actions, it was her eyes. She looked at me with a kind of measured detachment, as if she were already rehearsing life without me. And then there was the tone, the polite, almost corporate tone, like I'd suddenly become a colleague instead of a husband. It felt like living with a stranger who still had my wife's face. And for the first time I felt a tremor of fear beneath my curiosity. The moment everything shifted from unease to undeniable truth happened on a quiet afternoon when Margaret rushed out for a creative strategy meeting. She was in such a hurry she didn't fully close her laptop. That alone was unusual. Margaret treated her electronics like fragile extensions of herself. I walked past the table intending only to shut the lid, but then I saw the title of the document glowing on the screen: Project Liberation, Full Execution Blueprint. At first, I genuinely thought it was a pitch for a client. She often worked on brand identity campaigns with dramatic names. But when I skimmed the first page, I froze. This was no marketing plan. It was a structured strategy document with bullet points, timelines, and labeled phases. And the most chilling part was the word target, followed by two simple letters, AT. My initials. The phases were clinical: Phase 1, emotional severance. Phase 2, asset diversion. Phase 3, public narrative shift. Phase 4, identity relaunch. Phase 5, final independence. And under each phase were detailed steps: behaviors to adopt, emotions to weaponize, conversations to distort. It read like a psychological warfare manual. Then I noticed a note highlighted in yellow: neutralize his stability, make him feel like the problem. My stomach tightened, but not with betrayal, at least not yet. It was disbelief. A warped sense of surreal detachment. As I scrolled, I saw timestamps. 2 months of planning. 2 months of deliberate strategy. And one line at the bottom: launch date set. 60 days. That was the moment I realized she had been preparing for a war I didn't even know I was. And please don't forget to subscribe. B. Realizing she had set a 60-day countdown on our marriage did something strange to me. It didn't spark anger. It didn't even spark heartbreak. It triggered the same calm, analytical focus I slipped into when facing a security breach, when a threat had already infiltrated the system, and the only option left was containment. I stared at the calendar embedded in her document: red circles, arrows, bold text marking key milestones. She was treating our relationship like a hostile takeover. And ironically, she had chosen a timeline that worked perfectly in my favor. I closed the laptop gently, almost respectfully, and sat down on the edge of the couch. I replayed the last few weeks in my mind: her coldness, the midnight texts, the new wardrobe, the clipped tone. Everything suddenly snapped into a horrifying, yet strangely coherent pattern. She was already in phase 1. And she had been executing it with precision. But Margaret didn't know who she was dealing with. I lived in a world defined by backdoors, shadow logs, hidden triggers. Systems designed to catch exactly this kind of slow, concealed betrayal. My mother used to tell me, never let someone declare war on you twice. When the first one so quietly they never realize they lost until it's over. Those words echoed now with a weight they'd never had before. I didn't confront her. I didn't act different. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I began constructing my own timeline, mirroring hers, but faster, cleaner, quiet. She had 60 days. I only needed 20. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Margaret's face from the restaurant, tight, defensive, almost embarrassed yet defiant. And behind her, Marcus's smirk lingered like a bad smell. By morning, the anger had cooled into something sharper, something steadier. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to shout. I was going to prepare. People think revenge is a sudden act, a burst of emotion. But real consequences, the kind that stick, are crafted quietly, patiently, in the hours when no one is watching. I got dressed early and headed into my office downtown, the streetlights still buzzing overhead. My dad used to tell me, son, storms don't destroy sturdy buildings. They only show you which ones were weak already. I repeated that to myself as I unlocked the door. Margaret had been a weak structure for a long time. I just kept reinforcing her instead of walking away. I pulled out the folder I'd started months ago, back when I noticed the first cracks. Unexplained late nights, secretive texts, the sudden girls' trips. I wasn't proud of preparing for the worst, but something in me had known this day would come. I gathered bank statements Margaret thought I didn't monitor, copies of investments she didn't know were solely in my name, and the prenup she assumed we'd lost. Every piece felt like a brick laid in a foundation I should have started years earlier. I wasn't planning to hurt her. I was planning to free myself completely. Why please don't forget to subscribe. By noon, the sky over Atlanta had turned a bright, almost mocking blue. It was the kind of day that should have felt peaceful, but everything around me vibrated with a quiet edge. I drove home slowly, rehearsing what I needed to say without sounding bitter or broken. I wasn't either. Not anymore. I was focused, clear in a way I hadn't been in years. Still, as I pulled into the driveway, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. Even when someone hurts you, letting go of the dream you built with them isn't simple. Feels like burying a version of yourself. Margaret's car was already parked. That alone caught my attention. She usually stayed late at the hospital, avoiding conversations she didn't want to have. I stepped inside and found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her arms folded. She didn't look angry this time. She looked cautious, maybe even remorseful. For a moment, I wondered if she'd practiced something to say too. "Anthony," she began, her voice soft, uncertain. "About last night?" I held up a hand gently. "We'll get to that." She blinked, thrown off by my calmness. It was the first time she seemed afraid of losing control of the situation. The first time she realized I wasn't reacting, I was deciding. "I think we need space," I said evenly. "Real space. Not the kind you take every time you run to someone else for validation." Her lips parted, the beginning of an apology or an excuse. I couldn't tell which. But for once, the silence belonged to me. She followed me into the living room like a shadow trying to reattach itself. The sunlight poured in through the tall windows, turning the dust in the air into drifting gold. It would have been beautiful if not for the tension stretching the room thin. Margaret stood a few feet behind me, arms wrapped around herself. It was the first time I'd seen her look genuinely unsure. Maybe she thought I'd explode, accuse, beg, something predictable. But the stillness in me made her uneasy. "Anthony, what do you mean by space?" she asked, voice trembling just enough to reveal fear. I sat on the arm of the couch, elbows resting on my knees, studying her like I was finally seeing the full picture. "I mean, you've been preparing your exit for months," I said. "Hiding it behind words like freedom and finding yourself. You call it Project Liberation. I'm just calling it what it is." Her eyes snapped up, shock rippling across her face. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected me to know the term that was supposed to stay between her and her little confidants, including the man she thought I didn't know about. "How long?" she whispered. "Long enough," I replied. "Long enough to watch you rewrite our marriage into a burden you needed to escape. Long enough to see you turning me into the villain in a story you created so you'd feel justified." She stumbled back a step as if I'd hit her with the truth. "Anthony, we can fix this." I smiled, calm, unreadable. "We'll see. Please don't forget to subscribe." Night fell fast, swallowing the house in a quiet that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. I stepped onto the back porch, letting the cool air settle the heat in my chest. Inside, Margaret paced the kitchen like she was trying to outrun the consequences closing in around her. I'd spent months watching her drift into secrecy. Late-night texts she angled her phone away for, sudden extra shifts, unexplained mood swings, but now she was the one feeling watched. Exposed. Cornered by her own choices. When she finally joined me outside, the porch light flickered, casting her face in brief flashes, guilt, confusion, anger, fear. All of it tangled together. "Just say what you want," she said, hugging herself. "If you're leaving, say it." I shook my head slowly. "I'm not rushing anything. I'm not reacting to your timeline anymore." She inhaled sharply, as if the loss of control physically hurt. "Anthony, this isn't fair. You can't hold all the cards." A quiet laugh slipped out of me, not mocking, just tired. "You started a war you assumed I wouldn't notice. And now you're shocked you're not the only strategist on the field." She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what I've been going through." I looked at her fully then, the woman I'd once imagined a future with. "Then explain it. But don't rewrite history. And don't pretend liberation was anything more than you trying to escape responsibility." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. Just silence, and the realization that this time, I wasn't the one unsteady. The next morning arrived with a gray, reluctant dawn, the kind that makes everything feel suspended, unfinished. I woke before Margaret not because of restlessness, but because clarity has a way of jolting you awake. I brewed coffee in silence, letting the slow drip echo through the kitchen. It felt like the final moment before a verdict was spoken. When she emerged, wrapped in a robe, eyes swollen from a night of thinking more than sleeping, she paused in the doorway as if waiting for a cue. I motioned for her to sit. No anger. No raised voice. Just the kind of calm people mistake for surrender, right up until they realize it isn't. "I know about him," I said simply. "The late nights. The lunches that weren't lunches. The messages. I've known for a while." She flinched but didn't deny it. That alone told me everything. And before you ask, I continued, yes, I've prepared myself. Financially, emotionally, legally. I slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents, timelines, screenshots, and the separation terms I drafted weeks ago. You called it Project Liberation. Turns out I had a project of my own. She opened it, scanning page after page, her breath catching when she realized I'd protected everything. My business, my accounts, the house inherited from my father. Her war had begun long after I'd laid the foundation for my victory. When she finally looked up, eyes glassy, voice cracking, she whispered, "So this is it?" I nodded slowly. No fireworks, no shouting. Just consequences. As she broke down quietly, I stepped away, the weight lifting, but not disappearing. Healing never starts in triumph. It starts in truth. And as I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't the end of our story, just the end of her version of it. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share.